Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is More Planet Haven. Before we get started, real quick, just want to mention Patreon. You can support the channel on Patreon. You get no commercials, emails where we can talk back and forth, and you get your advanced videos on Sunday. We have a bumper crop here of new patrons. Sky Anderson is an Astral Master. Maximum is an Astral Scout. Cody Brook is Astral Ascended. And Sandwich Potatoes is Astral Ascended. I extend my thanks to these wonderful patrons, and I really appreciate the support. Next up, if you'd like private lessons for astral projection to begin projecting or increase the quality and quantity of your projections, I'd be glad to help you out. You'll find a link in the description for both Patreon and an email to contact me about information on the lessons. Planet Haven. If you've been following the channel and maybe looked at Space and Aliens playlist for Astral Club, you'll remember this is a planet that I visited several times. And I met there an intelligent race of really plant creatures who are in the high third density and can transfer at will into the lower fourth density, which allows them, spirit travel, much like we do with astral projection. After my encounter with the master and exiling him along with the monk, unfortunately, to the ultramassive black hole that we call Ton 618. I was feeling somewhat depressed, and I think you can understand why. Once again, I've lost another friend, and it cut me rather deeply. So when I left my body, I just found myself traveling to Haven. And when I arrived, I was hovering above. It's a very beautiful planet. It only has one yellow star. The oceans are over, I would say, at least 80% of the planet. But there's three continents that are separate. The green is the prevailing color. The oceans are a shade of green, a lighter shade of green, while the lands are covered in tropical jungles, and they are rather darker shades of green. As I landed on the planet, in the same type of glade that I usually land in, I sent out a signal, and I was greeted by three Havenites. And of course, I was happy to see them. Just the vibes that they give off lifts your mood. And the planet itself is so vibrant. I mentioned green, but there's so many different colors green. And I'm sure an artist could appreciate the varying shades better than I can. But they all seem to glow in a neon way, as if they're just exuding this amazing life force. I can't breathe the air there, but I can sense just the positive energy, life-giving vibes that this place just gives off, and it helps to charge your batteries just existing in that place. The Havenites welcomed me. And oh, by the way, I didn't see any ice caps on this planet, so it's probably in a more tropical type of stage of evolution at this point. At any rate, three of the Havenites greeted me, and obviously I extended my greeting. I asked them whether they were friends or brothers or sisters. They didn't quite understand the concept that I was trying to convey. I don't think it's necessarily valid in their society. In our society, we're very family oriented, and that family tends to be the nuclear family. But they didn't quite understand the concept. They said that they were a reproductive pod, and they called themselves, and then there was a series of high pitched notes. Naturally, I can't convey that. I don't have the, I suspect I don't have the necessary equipment to make sounds like that. So I asked them, what can I call them? And I could feel a gentle probe for a minute, and they said, you can call us Minerva. I said, which one's Minerva? They said, all three of us. Minerva, as you may remember from your school years, if you didn't fall asleep during the class on ancient Greek and Roman gods, Minerva was part of a triad of gods and goddesses. She was the goddess of wisdom, justice, law, victory, defensive victory, never offensive, and a sponsor of the arts like poetry, crafts, things like that. So I thought that was a rather apt name for a creature you know, like I was being confronted with. And so I started thinking of questions that I could ask that people might think, an Astral Club would be interesting. Because I wanted to find out more about the planet itself and the life there and how things work. So I mentioned that wait a minute, you said that you were a reproductive pod. How does that work? Well, they freely answered with no embarrassment, which is a little bit different from the way I was feeling, but that's probably a human hang up. When the warm season arrives, they begin, and the thermal winds blow in from the sea, they all travel to the shorelines in their various continents where they live. And each one of them release spores from their upper body that are then gently blown onto receptor stems, which are about mid-placed on their body. This receptor stem has a sticky film to it, so the spores, hopefully, stick to this particular stem, which is then, after the mating period is done, is retracted, and several seed pods are then fertilized, and then they grow until maturity. So that's how they reproduce. Interesting. They then asked me, how do humans procreate? I hesitated for a minute. I said, well, not too differently from how you do it. There's a bit more movement involved, but it often happens on warm beaches for us as well, which they thought was interesting. They didn't get my subtext of humor, but I did, and I appreciated it at least. So I then asked them, did you evolve on land? And they said, no, we have ancient group memories. They're a bit dim, but we carry them with us. And before we achieve sentience, our ancestors gradually colonized the land. And we found the land to be fertile, and it allowed us to escape the predatory insect hives that lived in the sea. Well, naturally, that prompted my next question. I said, insect hives? And they said, yes. We can ascend to the fourth dimension if you like, and we'll show you the life cycle and what we mean by these insect hives. I said, yes, definitely. Lead and I'll follow you. The Minerva triad shimmered for a minute. If I had been in the physical, they probably would have disappeared from my vision. But since I was in the astral and therefore in the lower fourth dimension myself, I was able to quickly adjust my vibratory rate so that I could perceive them. And they said, please follow. And they soared into the sky at a very rapid speed. And then they plunged into the green ocean near a continental shelf. We sank about 50 feet or about 15 meters down to the ocean floor. I remember signaling to them saying I was glad it wasn't too deep. And they said, we know you don't like deep, dark water. No fear, though. Our oceans are much shallower planet wide than those on Earth. And I got the image that they have really a shallow sea over the entire planet. I think there may be areas that are a little bit deeper than this, but the vision I got was they don't have deep places like we do here on our planet. It's more or less a fairly shallow sea, which is fine as far as I'm concerned. I don't like the idea of going to the bottom of a very deep, very dark ocean. I've done it a couple times before, and it's not my favorite thing to do. Although I don't mind going into space, but whatever. On the ocean bottom, there were numerous plants of all descriptions, swaying with the gentle current. I didn't sense any intelligence from the plants, though. They were just regular plants. They were quite exotic looking, but I didn't sense any sophisticated thought coming from them. The peaceful scene was broken, though, by a black cloud that shut out the light. As I looked up, I saw this black mass was now covering the surface, and it was so dark that it screened out the light. So there was like a little eclipse now that had affected the area where we were, currently under the water. Um, then I noticed that some of the creatures on this black raft of sorts was just a mass of I guess, of insects. They were diving into the water like little black missiles. They were launching themselves downwards. And I looked at one of the creatures. They resembled, let's say, a beetle type creature, about 2 inches or about 5 centimeters long. They then proceeded to stab the plants with long barbs that were jutting out in front. With stolen leaves in tow, they surfaced and returned to the mass that they had come from, their hive, if you will. Uh, After a minute, all at once, thousands of these beetles then proceeded to dive back into that same seabed, just stripping away all of the greenery. In a matter of moments, the seafloor was stripped barren. The death raft then floated onwards. They then said that we believe it was these water predators that prompted our ancestors to leave the ocean, which makes sense to me. Um, it's thought that the first creatures to go onto land, amphibians, started to do so as a way to retreat from larger fish predators. and that over millennia, these amphibians started to spend more and more time on land. They developed eggs that had some sort of a film around them which could retain moisture, and they would start to bury their eggs on land as a way to prevent massive predation, not only on themselves but also on their eggs, their young, their offspring. So perhaps it seems in this case that the ancestors of the Havenites had probably left the ocean for similar reasons. When they first came onto land, they were really the first life form to start making it onto land. And evidently this process happened over an extended period of time. But that's why they proceeded onto land. And if you recall, the way they achieve sentience, which I discussed in a prior video, was that they were eventually pursued onto land by a creature much like these water beetles that adjusted itself to live on land. And eventually, this predator was able to fly and had preyed upon the Havenites' ancestors by using a barb like structure to suck out the vital moisture and the vital nutrients from the Havenite ancestors, killing them. The Havenites developed their ability to communicate with one another through an interlocking root system and also through various pheromone type substances which they would emit into the air, which would signal danger, presence of predators, and it would alert the other plants to this danger. Eventually, they developed a masking system where they were able to communicate when a predator appeared, and then they were then able to mask their scent by use of these pheromones and an altered vibrational state. All of this effectively hid them from their predator. Now, that predator eventually went extinct, and they do feel kind of bad about that. But it certainly helped their life form along, and it helped them to eventually achieve sentience as a way to combat this particular predator. They saw that I felt very sad about this now barren seafloor. And the Minerva entity asked me, "Why do you mourn?" I said, "Well, because of the death all over, the seafloor. All the plants have been stripped and have been destroyed." And they said, "Well, do not weep for them. The nutrients from their bodies nourishes the swarm. And when the swarm dies at the end of their brief existence, their bodies fall to the seafloor in another area. And as their bodies decay, life is given back to the seafloor, enabling new plant colonies to grow elsewhere." I thought about that for a minute, and I said, well, it's pretty similar to Earth. That's how things work on Earth as well. So life, death begets new life. And that raised my spirits quite a bit the more I thought about that thought. I could feel the return signal starting to alert me, and I knew I didn't have much time. So I thanked the tripartite Havenite, which calls itself now Minerva, and appreciated the knowledge that they were able to give me, as well as the excellent hospitality that the Havenites always have extended to me. and that how they've always successfully raised my spirits. So with that, I bid them goodbye, and I returned to my body. If you found this information interesting, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, make sure you ring that bell. Please, questions and comments. I love that stuff. It's always very instructive, and many times it'll end up somewhere in a Q&A special. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.